It is February 25th, 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to take a second and just visualize where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at a digital map of the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's up on a big screen in a command center somewhere, or maybe you're just looking at it on your phone while you're having your morning coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But this map, it doesn't look like it did 5 years ago.
Not at all.
It looks like a chessboard where every single piece has been shoved forward into a striking position. We are talking about the largest accumulation of naval and air power in the region since the invasion of Iraq back in 2003. And it feels, honestly, like the entire world is just holding its breath.
It really does. It has that heavy static atmosphere right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. And the silence right now is deafening. We aren't just talking about a diplomatic spat or, some new sanctions being rolled out here.
Yeah.
We are looking at the actual nuts and bolts of a potential full-scale conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. And the terrifying thing is, most people out there are just reading the little breaking news banner saying tensions rising, and then they're just moving on with their day.
Yeah, tensions rising. That is the banner on the news every single night. It has just become background noise for most of us. But today, on this deep dive, we are going to do something a little different. We're going to move way past those banners.
Exactly.
We're going to unpack the actual military mechanics of what happens if that breath is finally released. We're talking logistics, we're talking very specific missile capabilities, and we're talking about an economic fallout that could make the 2008 financial crisis look like a picnic.
That's the mission here. We need to analyze the capabilities that are currently sitting on the board. Now, we aren't predicting the future. No one has a crystal ball, and frankly, anyone who tells you they know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow is lying to you.
Oh, for sure.
But we can look at the assets. We can look at the wild weasel missions, the hypersonic threats, the actual physics of closing the Strait of Hormuz. Because when you look at the sheer volume of iron moved into the theater right now, you realize this isn't just posturing anymore. This is a loaded gun.
And the big question we really need to answer today, the one that jumps right out from the massive stack of reports and analysis we've been going through, is this. Is this going to be a repeat of past interventions that we've seen over the last 20 years? Or have the rules of warfare fundamentally changed in a way that the West might not actually be ready for?
That is the core question, because if you look at the sources we have, and we've got a massive stack of them, from military technical manuals to geopolitical strategy papers, the consensus really seems to be that the playbook has completely changed, but the players might still be trying to use the old manual.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with Section 1, which is the buildup and the order of battle. We need to understand what is actually sitting in the water and on the tarmac right now as we speak, because the scale of this buildup is, well, it's just massive.
It's staggering.
We are hearing estimates of 200 to 250 combat aircraft. We have a naval armada that rivals the entire buildup for Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Right. It's a massive amount of iron. You have carrier strike groups positioned in the Gulf and the Mediterranean. You have air assets moved into Jordan, Kuwait, the UAE. And when you look at the actual composition of that air power, it tells you a very specific story about what kind of war is being planned here.
What do you mean?
Well, this isn't a peacekeeping force. This isn't for flying patrols. This is a strike force designed from the ground up for high-intensity conflict.
Let's talk about the planes then, because this is where the analysis gets really technical and really interesting. We aren't just talking about generic jets flying around.
Yeah.
We have very specific roles here. You've got the F-35s. Now, normally we hear about the F-35 in the context of, budget overruns or production delays.
Right, the usual political talking points.
Exactly. But in this specific scenario, what is its actual job?
The F-35s are effectively the quarterbacks of the sky. In a modern conflict against a sophisticated enemy like Iran, you aren't just dogfighting. This isn't Top Gun.
Right.
The F-35 uses its stealth and its massive, highly advanced sensor suite to basically manage the entire battlefield. It sees everything. It sees enemy radar emissions, heat signatures, data links, and it takes all that data, processes it, and shares it with other platforms, all while staying completely hidden.
So it's orchestrating the fight.
It is the brain of the operation. It tells the other planes where to go and what to shoot at without ever exposing itself.
So it's really not just a fighter. It is a flying supercomputer that coordinates the violence.
Precisely. It builds this comprehensive picture of the battlefield that is shared across the entire military network. But here's the catch. You can't just send the quarterback in alone. You need the linemen. You need the people who are actually going to clear the path.
Right.
And that brings us to a term I saw repeatedly in the research that sounds Frankly, it sounds a bit terrifying. Wild weasels.
Oh, weasels,
Whoa.
blood wheels. Yeah, I saw that
Yeah.
too. It sounds like something out of a Saturday morning cartoon or maybe a nature documentary.
Yeah.
But the reality described in these military reports is incredibly gritty.
It is terrifying. The Wild Weasel mission is widely considered one of the most dangerous jobs in the Air Force. These are typically F-16s, specifically the Block 50 and 52 variants, which are outfitted with very specialized gear for this specific task. Their job is SEAD. That stands for Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses.
CA. Okay, so they're the ones who go in to take out the surface-to-air missiles.
Yes. And the way they actually have to do it is, well, it's incredibly counterintuitive. To destroy an enemy radar site, you usually have to get that radar to turn on. Think of a radar like a flashlight in a pitch-black room.
Yeah.
If the flashlight is off, you can't see the person holding it.
Right, they are hidden in the dark.
Exactly. But if they turn that flashlight on to look for you, suddenly you know exactly where they are. So the Wild Weasel flies in, literally baiting the enemy's surface-to-air missile systems to light them up.
So they are the worm on the hook. They are intentionally flying into hostile enemy airspace, basically screaming, "Hey, I'm right here, shoot at me."
They are the worm, yes, but they carry a very big stick. Once that enemy radar turns on to lock onto the F-16, the pilot fires a high-speed anti-radiation missile, something like the HARM.
And what does that do?
This missile detects the specific radar energy being emitted, and it basically rides that invisible beam of energy right back down to the source and blows the radar dish to pieces. They kick down the door, so to speak, so the rest of the strike package can actually get through safely.
That sounds like a video game.
Yeah.
But the actual human risks there, I mean, you're asking a pilot to deliberately fly into the teeth of a highly sophisticated air defense network.
Exactly. And unlike the last 20 years of operating in places like Iraq or Afghanistan where the air threat was virtually non-existent, this is a near-peer environment. These Iranian radars shoot back, and their missiles are fast and accurate. If a weasel pilot makes a split-second mistake, or if the enemy tactics are just slightly better than our intelligence expected, that pilot is not coming home. It requires absolute nerves of steel.
So the weasels go in first and kick down the door. The quarterbacks are sitting back calling the plays. Then come the trucks, right?
Right, the F-15Es, the Strike Eagles, these are what the military calls the bomb trucks. Once the enemy air defenses are degraded by the weasels, these guys come swooping in carrying massive, heavy ordnance loads.
We're talking laser-guided bombs, bunker busters, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They are there to service the actual targets on the ground. And circling high above all of this chaotic action, you would have the F-22s. Those are the pure air dominance fighters. Their only job is ensuring that if the Iranian Air Force tries to launch any of their own fighters to intercept, they are swatted right out of the sky before they even know they're being targeted.
Okay, so we have the quarterback in the F-35, the bait in the F-16, the truck in the F-15, and the bodyguard in the F-22. That is quite a sophisticated team.
It's the most advanced strike package on Earth.
But what exactly are they aiming at? Because looking through the sources, this isn't just about hitting a couple of military bases or a runaway. The target list seems incredibly extensive.
It is expensive, and this is really where the political objectives and the military objectives start to blur together. The analysis suggests a complex mix of targets. First, obviously, are the nuclear facilities, but we have to be very clear here for a second. These aren't just normal buildings sitting in some industrial park.
Right, they aren't on the surface.
No, these are deep underground, heavily hardened targets. Hitting them isn't just a matter of dropping a standard bomb. It's an engineering nightmare. Then, beyond that, you have the ballistic missile production sites. And those are intentionally scattered all over the massive country to prevent the U.S. from delivering a single knockout blow.
And the sources also mention the regime infrastructure itself as a target.
Correct. The security apparatus, the National Command and Control Centers, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters. There is actually a whole school of thought we found in the analysis regarding the Greater Israel Project.
Right, we should touch on that carefully. Some of the analysis points out that the strategic goal here might involve something much larger.
Yes. The analysis we reviewed suggests that for some factions, the goal isn't just to temporarily degrade Iran's military capacity, it's to fundamentally reshape the map of the Middle East, to permanently eliminate the primary resistance to Israeli regional expansion by totally decapitating the Iranian state structure.
That sounds an awful lot like Shock and Awe 2.0.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that the rules of the game has completely changed. So is this actually just a bigger version of what we saw when we went into Baghdad back in 2003?
It might look similar if you're just looking at a PowerPoint slide or a slick news graphic on TV. Lots of planes, lots of bombs. But the target itself is vastly different.
How so?
In 2003, Iraq's military had been completely hollowed out by a decade of crushing international sanctions. Their equipment was obsolete, their morale was non-existent. Iran is completely different. Iran is a fortress. And more importantly, it is an active, capable industrial power that has spent the last 30 straight years studying exactly how the United States fights its wars.
And they've been building weapons specifically to counter our methods.
Exactly. They built specific asymmetrical weapons to target U.S. vulnerabilities. This isn't some passive enemy that is just going to sit in their trenches and take a beating.
Which raises a really important point about the practicalities of all this. We can sit here and talk about F-35s and stealth technology all day long, but historically, wars are won and lost on logistics.
100%.
The boring stuff. Fuel, ammo, food. And reading through these unclassified reports, there seems to be a massive, glaring logistical nightmare hiding right in plain sight. So let's move into section 2, which is the logistics nightmare.
It really is the stuff that keeps four-star generals awake at night. There's an old saying, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. So let's start with the basic geography of the region. Distance is an absolute killer here.
Give us an example.
To get from a friendly base in Kuwait or a carrier floating in the Persian Gulf to targets like Tehran or the nuclear sites near Natanz, that is not a short hop. You are talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles. For example, a flight from Baghdad to Tehran is roughly 377 nautical miles.
And they aren't flying commercial airliners in a straight line.
Exactly. They aren't flying in a straight line. They are doglegging to avoid known air defense bubbles. They are dropping down to the deck to hide in radar clutter. They are loitering in holding patterns, waiting for their specific strike windows to open up.
All of which burns a tremendous amount of fuel.
Massive amounts. Modern fighters burn gas like crazy, especially when they are fully loaded down with heavy bombs and flying hard tactical maneuvers. They simply cannot get there, fight, and get back on a single internal tank of gas. They desperately need mid-air refueling.
And that brings us to the tankers. I remember reading a description of them in one of the reports we pulled, and it described them as just big pieces of metal floating in the sky.
That is exactly what they are. They are essentially converted commercial airliners. The KC-135, the KC-46, they are very slow.
Yep.
They are massive, and they have absolutely zero stealth capabilities. They show up on an enemy radar screen from hundreds of miles away like a giant neon sign.
Right.
Now, in previous wars, the U.S. could just park these tankers safely in the sky, right outside the combat zone. The fighters could pop out of the fight, fill up their tanks, and go right back in. But Iran has highly accurate, long-range missiles.
So if they decide to shoot at the gas station...
Exactly. If Iran can push those vulnerable tankers back, if they can force the U.S. to keep the tankers 500 miles away from the fight just because of the threat of being shot down, then the strike fighters literally cannot reach their targets.
Or worse.
Or much worse. They can reach the target, drop their payload, turn around, and then realize the tanker had to retreat to avoid a missile barrage, and now that pilot doesn't have enough fuel to make it back to friendly territory.
That is a deeply terrifying thought. You could have a billion-dollar strike package that literally just runs out of gas over hostile enemy territory simply because the logistics chain broke down.
Precisely. It is a known vulnerability called the tanker gap, and Iranian warplanners know all about it. And it's not just a fuel problem either, it is munitions. We really have to look at something called interceptor math. This is a crucial concept that explains why this potential war would be so incredibly difficult and expensive.
Break down this interceptor math for us, because I think the general public assumes the U.S. military just has an infinite supply of missiles.
Right, like a video game with infinite ammo.
Yeah.
But it's not. The U.S. Navy ships that are out there protecting these aircraft carriers, the guided missile destroyers and cruisers, they have extremely advanced interceptor missiles to shoot down incoming aerial threats. Things like the SM-2 or the SM-6 missile.
And those are expensive.
They cost millions of dollars each. And a single ship can only carry a finite number of them in its vertical launch cells. A typical destroyer might have 90 to 96 total cells, but they aren't all loaded with air defense missiles. Some have cruise missiles for land attacks, some have anti-submarine rockets.
Okay, so they have a limited magazine. And Iran has drones that cost, what, $20,000?
Or even less. Some defense estimates are as low as a few $1,000s for the really basic Iranian suicide drones. So here is the brutal math problem. Iran decides to fire a swarm of cheap drones at the fleet, let's say 50 of them. The U.S. ship detects them and fires its million-dollar interceptors.
And it hits them.
Right. The U.S. ship wins the engagement technically. It successfully shoots down all the incoming drones. But now the U.S. ship has used 50 of its most advanced missiles. Its magazines might be practically empty.
And they can't just reload at sea?
No. To reload those vertical launch cells, a destroyer can't just press a button. It actually has to completely leave the combat theater, sail to a secure, friendly port like Bahrain, dock, and use a massive, specialized crane to physically drop new metals into the tubes. That process takes days, sometimes weeks.
And meanwhile, back in the Gulf, Iran still has thousands of those cheap drones left in warehouses.
Exactly. You can technically win every single tactical engagement, shoot down every drone, and still lose the broader battle because you simply ran out of bullets before the enemy ran out of targets. It is a classic cost imposition strategy. They either bankrupt you or they disarm you purely by exhaustion.
That connects to something else I saw in the source materials about the maintenance and sustainment issues. We always assume these nuclear aircraft carriers are these perfect floating cities of infinite efficiency. But there were reports we read, I think it was specifically about the USS Gerald R. Ford deployment, about sewage issues.
I know, it sounds almost trivial when we're talking about war, doesn't it?
It does.
But it is highly indicative of a mechanical and human system that is already stretched incredibly thin. There were published reports of the ship's sewage systems failing, literally forcing sailors to use bottles for weeks. There are widespread documented issues with extreme crew fatigue and burnout, and you have to remember, that is in peacetime, or at least relative peacetime. High-intensity air operations require a massive, almost incomprehensible amount of human labor. For every single hour an F-16 or an F-35 is actually flying in the air, it requires something like 8 to 12 hours of maintenance on the ground or on the deck.
Wait, 8 to 12 hours of physical work for just 1 hour of flying time. That ratio is insane.
It's the harsh reality of maintaining ultra-high-performance combat machines. You have a crew that has to check the complex hydraulics, reload massive software updates, fix delicate sensors, and meticulously repair the stealth coating, which is actually very fragile and degrades quickly.
It'll have to stop work.
Exactly. If you are trying to sustain a high-tempo air war for weeks, and we aren't talking about a short 12-day flare-up here, but a sustained, relentless campaign to degrade a country the size of Iran, you are going to physically break your maintenance crews. You are going to run out of specialized spare parts.
Because the logistics chain is brittle.
Very brittle. We've already seen this exact dynamic play out with the severe munition shortages in Ukraine and Israel over the last few years. The stockpile of high-end Western weapons simply isn't infinite.
Okay, so we have this brittle logistics chain, limited expensive ammo, and vulnerable flying gas stations. Now let's talk about what they're actually flying into. Let's move to Section 3, the target and Iran's defensive strategy. Because you mentioned earlier that Iran is a fortress. We aren't talking about flat, open desert here like we saw in parts of Iraq.
No, not at all. Geography is Iran's oldest and, frankly, best ally. The Zagros mountain range is an absolute nightmare for any attacking force. It forms this massive, rugged, natural barrier along the border.
And they use that terrain to their advantage.
Absolutely. The key military and nuclear facilities aren't just sitting out in the open on a flat plain. They are buried deep underground, or they are literally tunneled thousands of feet into the sides of solid granite mountains. To even scratch those facilities, you need incredibly specialized bunker buster munitions.
Like the MOAB.
Even bigger. Things like the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator. It's a 30,000-pound bomb. And you can only carry those massive weapons on heavy strategic bombers, like the B-2 stealth bomber, which just adds an entirely new layer of logistical complexity to the whole operation.
And what about the air defenses guarding those mountains? We talked about the wild weasels going in to hunt them down, but the sources say Iran uses a specific tactic called shoot and scoot.
Right. In the old days, think Vietnam or the First Gulf War, air defense systems were usually static concrete sites. They poured concrete, set up the radar, and left it there. You knew exactly where they were via satellite, you bombed them, and you were done.
But Iran doesn't do that.
No. Iran relies heavily on highly mobile systems. They use the Russian-made S-300, the newer S-400, and their own domestically produced variants like the Bavar 373, which intelligence analysis shows is actually very capable. They mount these entire radar and missile systems on heavy trucks.
So they are constantly moving.
Exactly. They drive to a hidden spot, set up in minutes, fire their missiles at incoming planes, and then quickly pack up and drive away before the U.S. anti-radiation missile can even reach their location.
And there was this specific term in the reports, cooperative blinking. I found this absolutely fascinating when we were reviewing the documents. What exactly is cooperative blinking?
It is a brilliant and very clever radar tactic designed specifically to defeat the American wild weasels. Okay, so imagine you are a pilot standing in a completely dark field and someone shines a bright flashlight right at you.
Okay.
You pull out your gun and you shoot at the flashlight. That's the harm missile. But what if there are 5 different people with flashlights out in that field and they are flickering them on and off in a rapid, totally random pattern?
You wouldn't know which one to aim at.
Right. You can't lock your sights onto any single flashlight long enough to actually pull the trigger before it goes dark and another one pops up somewhere else. The Iranian air defense batteries coordinate through a secure network. Radar A turns on for maybe 5 seconds to grab a quick track on a U.S. jet, then immediately turns off just as Radar B turns on 5 miles away to continue the track. It totally confuses the guidance computer inside the U.S. anti-radiation missiles. It makes these mobile batteries very, very hard to actually kill.
That is incredibly sophisticated. It's not just brute force shooting. It is complex geometry and split-second timing.
It is, and that is strictly the physical realm. That's before we even touch on the cyber and space domains. Because the first phase of any modern war isn't actually dropping bombs, it's hacking.
Right, disabling the network.
The U.S. military will undoubtedly try to launch massive cyber attacks to blind Iran's radars and completely disrupt their national communications network. But the reports strongly suggest Iran has spent the last decade aggressively hardening these digital systems, potentially with deep technical assistance from Chinese or Russian cyber units.
So they might not just easily go offline.
Right. They have actually built their own internal national intranet isolated from the global web. They might not just go dark as easily as the Iraqi army did in 1991.
Okay, so the shield is incredibly tough. Now let's flip it and talk about the sword. Because the narrative that is often presented on the evening news is that the U.S. launches these massive strikes and Iran they just take it. Or maybe they send a few angry diplomatic letters.
Right, which is a dangerous assumption.
Very dangerous.
Yep.
And the deep dive approach we were taking here says we really need to look at the asymmetric capabilities. So let's move into section 4. The counterpunch.
This is the part of the analysis that completely changes the strategic calculus. The Iranian counterpunch is going to be brutal. Iran currently possesses the largest and easily the most diverse ballistic and cruise missile arsenal in the entire Middle East. We aren't just talking about old, inaccurate Scud missiles falling into the desert anymore.
Right.
We are talking about highly advanced, precision-guided ballistic missiles, and the really big, scary word that everyone in the defense establishment is whispering right now, hypersonics.
Hypersonics. These are the missiles that move so fast and maneuver so erratically that our traditional air defense systems basically can't track them.
Exactly. A traditional ballistic missile flies in a very predictable parabolic arc. It's like an outfielder tracking a high-fly ball in baseball. Once the ball leaves the bat, you can use physics to calculate exactly where it's going to land, and you run there to catch it. That's how our Patriot and Aegis systems work. They calculate the intercept point.
But hypersonics don't play by those rules.
Not at all. Hypersonics fly at staggering speeds, Mach 5 or much higher, but they stay much lower in the atmosphere instead of going to space. And crucially, they can maneuver in flight. They can bob and weave like a fighter jet. This completely breaks the U.S. Aegis defense algorithms because by the time the computer calculates where the missile is going to be, it has already changed direction.
That is terrifying. But there is an even newer threat that really caught my eye in the reports, specifically regarding our naval assets, the supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. I think the designation was the CM-302.
Yes. Multiple intelligence sources indicate Iran may have acquired these systems, or very similar variants like the Chinese YJ-12. These are what we call sea-skimming missiles.
What does that mean exactly?
It means they fly incredibly low to the surface of the water, just above the wave crest, sometimes only 10 to 15 meters off the water. The purpose is to physically stay under the radar horizon of the enemy ships, and they fly at blistering speeds of Mach 2.5 to Mach 4.
So because the Earth is curved, the ship's radar literally can't see them over the horizon until they are right on top of them.
Effectively, yes. The curvature of the Earth physically hides the incoming missile. By the time an American destroyer's radar detects a sea skimmer popping up over the horizon flying at Mach 3, the ship's crew has about 45 seconds to react before impact.
45 seconds. I just want the listener to really absorb that. 45 seconds. That is not even enough time to think, let alone coordinate a defense.
It's not. Human reaction time is too slow. In that tiny window, the ship's automated defense computers have to detect the threat, track it, classify it as hostile, and successfully fire interceptor missiles. If it's just one single missile, maybe the ship's automated phalanx gun, the close-in weapon system, manages to shred it at the last second.
But they wouldn't fire just one.
Exactly. What if it's a swarm? What if it's 10 supersonic missiles coming from 3 different compass angles, mixed in with 50 cheap decoy drones to confuse the radar? That is a literal nightmare scenario for a carrier strike group. A multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier carrying thousands of American sailors could potentially be taken entirely out of the fight by a coordinated salvo of missiles that cost a tiny fraction of that.
And it's not just Iran pulling the trigger from their own borders, is it? We have to factor in the axis of resistance. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot on cable news, but what does it actually mean practically in a shooting war scenario?
It means the United States isn't just fighting one country. It is fighting an entire mobilized region. If the U.S. strikes Iran, the activation order immediately goes out to all allied proxy forces. Look at Iraq. You have heavily armed militias there, like the PMF, equipped with advanced drones and rockets, who are sitting literally miles away from active U.S. bases.
Wait, we still have active bases in Iraq right now?
We do, and they are completely static, well-mapped targets. Then look south to Yemen. Ansar Allah, commonly known as the Houthis, they have already proven over the last few years that they have the capability to effectively shut down commercial shipping in the Red Sea. They possess battle-hardened capabilities to accurately strike naval assets.
And then there's Lebanon.
Right. Hezbollah sits right on Israel's northern border with an absolutely immense rocket stockpile. Military estimates say they have over 150,000 rockets and precision-guided munitions pointed directly at critical Israeli infrastructure.
So it isn't just a surgical strike. It becomes a multi-front regional conflagration overnight.
Exactly. It's not a polite duel between two nations. It becomes a chaotic barroom brawl where everyone is throwing punches. And those U.S. bases scattered across Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, these are huge, sprawling logistical complexes. They are very, very hard to defend against a complex 360-degree drone and missile threat. The geopolitical analysis suggests the governments of these host countries are absolutely terrified of this scenario.
Like Jordan, right. The reports mentioned Jordan has publicly stated they absolutely won't allow their sovereign airspace to be used by either side.
Yes, but defense analysts heavily doubt that stated neutrality will actually hold once the shooting starts. The diplomatic and economic pressure from Washington will be immense. But here is the massive risk for those countries. If the King of Jordan bows to U.S. pressure and allows American jets to use Jordanian airspace to bomb Iran, Jordan immediately becomes a legitimate military target for Iranian retaliation.
And their own citizens might revolt.
Exactly. You could see massive internal uprisings in these allied countries. The Arab street, so to speak, might not stay quiet if they watch their own governments actively aiding the destruction of a neighboring Muslim country. You could legitimately have a sudden regime collapse in a key U.S. allied nation, which throws the whole strategic map into total chaos.
Which leads us perfectly into the next major layer of this onion, and it's the economic fallout. Because look, even if you are listening to this right now and you don't care at all about F-35 turn rates or radar evasion geometry, you care about the price of gas at your local station.
Everyone cares about that.
And you care about your 401k and your retirement savings. So let's jump into Section 5. The global economic nuclear option.
This entire economic scenario centers on one narrow, incredibly vital strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz.
The ultimate global choke point.
Exactly. Roughly 20 to 25% of the entire world's daily oil consumption passes through that one tiny strait. Iran has explicitly and repeatedly threatened to close it entirely if they are attacked. And the truly scary thing is, they actually don't need a massive, sophisticated blue water navy to accomplish that.
How do they actually do it then? How do you close an ocean?
Naval mines. Thousands and thousands of naval mines dropped into the shipping lanes. Combine that with shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in fortified caves all along the jagged coastline. Add in swarms of heavily armed fast attack craft and suicide drones. They can quickly turn that narrow strait into an absolute kill zone for commercial shipping.
But wouldn't the massive U.S. Navy just sail in and clear the mines? We have minesweepers, right?
Eventually, yes. But minesweeping is incredibly slow, tedious, and highly dangerous work, even in peacetime. And you certainly can't safely sweep for mines while anti-ship missiles and explosive drones are actively raining down on your minesweepers from the cliffs above. But here's the really crucial economic key. Iran actually doesn't have to physically block every single square inch of the water to crash the market.
They just have to make it dangerous enough.
Exactly. The fear factor is enough. Global maritime insurance vanishes instantly. No sane tanker captain or corporate shipping board is going to insure a massive oil tanker to sail through an active missile shooting gallery. The insurance premiums would go to infinity overnight, so the global oil trade through the Gulf just halts, completely halts.
And the economic consequences of that.
Well, the term oil shock is honestly too mild. Prices wouldn't just rise a few dollars, they could double or triple overnight. We could be looking at $200 or even $300 for a single barrel of oil.
And what does that practically do to the global economy?
It triggers an immediate global depression, not a recession, a deep structural depression. Global supply chains immediately collapse. Literally everything runs on oil. Transportation of goods, jet fuel for cargo, the chemical fertilizers required for global food production, the plastics in our medical devices. Inflation would spike to catastrophic levels we haven't seen in modern history. But here is where it gets really terrifying. According to the deep financial analysis in our source deck, the derivatives market.
Okay, the derivatives market.
Yeah.
Break that down for us, because that sounds like Wall Street jargon.
It is, but it affects everyone. Think of a derivative simply as a massive financial bet placed on another bet. The entire global financial system is currently heavily leveraged on the core assumption of stable global energy prices. There are quadrillions, literally quadrillions, when the queue of dollars in derivative exposure globally tied directly to interest rates, currency fluctuations, and energy prices.
Yeah.
A sudden, unprecedented violent shock, like the total closure of the Strait of Hormuz and oil rocketing to $300, could cause an immediate massive liquidity crisis. It would trigger margin calls that banks simply cannot pay. It would wipe out that market in days. It's like pulling the absolute bottom card out of a skyscraper-sized house of cards.
Yeah.
It could easily trigger a cascading financial collapse much, much worse than what we experienced in 2008.
And the Iranian leadership obviously knows this.
Of course they know it.
Right.
It is their ultimate strategic deterrent against Western military action. They are basically holding a gun to the global economy and saying, if you bomb our house down, we will take the entire global financial system down with us. It's essentially mutually assured economic destruction.
And besides just blocking the shipping lanes, they could also target the actual energy infrastructure directly, right?
Ah.
We've seen drone strikes on Saudi oil refineries in the past.
Yes. Those past attacks were just a small warning shot of what is possible. In a full-scale, unconstrained war, Iran could intentionally target the massive, highly concentrated oil refineries and crucial water desalination plants in Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
And those aren't easy to fix.
Not at all. These are incredibly complex, billion-dollar industrial facilities. You can't just send a guy out with a wrench to patch a pipe. Rebuilding a destroyed mega-refinery takes years of specialized engineering and parts. If those facilities are heavily damaged or destroyed, a huge percentage of the energy capacity of the Middle East goes offline not for weeks, but for a decade. Imagine the catastrophic impact that would have on the industrial economies of Europe and Asia.
That is just a sobering thought. It means this isn't just a regional war over borders or ideology. It is a war over the fundamental lifeblood of the modern world. And speaking of the broader world, we can't ignore the other massive players on the chessboard here. So let's pivot to Section 6, geopolitics and the great power shift. Because Russia and China, they aren't just sitting quietly on the sidelines eating popcorn while this happens, are they?
Far from it. This is where the geopolitics of the situation shifts from a localized Middle East conflict to a true great power struggle. Both Russia and China view this entire crisis as a vital proxy war for the future of the global world order.
Let's take China first.
Yeah.
Because they buy a massive amount of Iranian oil, right?
They absolutely depend on it to fuel their industrial base. China and Iran signed a comprehensive 25-year strategic partnership agreement. But their relationship goes way beyond just buying cheap sanctioned oil. The real danger for the U.S. is the tech transfer. We mentioned the advanced anti-ship missiles earlier, but there is also critical satellite data. China has deployed its own highly advanced global navigation satellite system called Beidou.
Beidou. Why is that specifically important in a war with the U.S.?
Because usually in a modern war, the first thing the U.S. military might do is degrade or completely jam the GPS signals in the conflict region. This makes enemy missiles blind and inaccurate. But if Iran is using the Chinese Beidou network,
Then jamming American GPS does nothing.
Exactly. Iranian ballistic and cruise missiles can still find their targets with absolute pinpoint accuracy because they are being guided by Chinese satellites in space. That is a massive operational game changer. It means the United States simply does not have a monopoly on precision-guided warfare anymore.
And what about Russia's role in all this?
Russia and Iran are essentially sharing the same trench right now, fighting against massive U.S. economic sanctions. They have significantly deepened their military and intelligence cooperation. We've seen Russian naval vessels repeatedly docking in Iranian ports for joint exercises. They actively share battlefield intelligence. And then there is the broader BRICS angle to consider.
How does the BRICS alliance view this?
The potential conflict is viewed broadly by the global south, the BRICS nations, as a fight between what they term the empire of chaos, meaning the U.S. and Western Europe, versus the emerging multipolar world order.
So a direct American attack on Iran is seen as a direct attack on their new club.
Exactly. Ironically, an attack might actually solidify their anti-Western alliance. It proves to those nations that they urgently need to de-dollarize their economies, that they need entirely separate financial clearing systems, and that they need their own mutual defense military alliances. It essentially accelerates the very thing Washington fears most, a unified, powerful global bloc directly challenging Western hegemony.
What about the diplomatic track, though? We keep hearing about back-channel negotiations happening in places like Oman. There were statements from U.S. officials just recently about keeping diplomatic pathways open. Is there any actual chance for a negotiated deal here?
The intelligence analysis we reviewed is extremely skeptical about that. The specific term diplomatic deception comes up frequently. Several analysts argue that the current negotiations are merely a calculated stall tactic by the West. The argument is that the U.S. isn't negotiating in good faith to reach a lasting deal. They are simply negotiating to buy the necessary time to get the aircraft carriers into position and to get those massive logistical supply chains sorted out.
You mean the shifting goalpost tactic?
Right. Every single time Iran signals they might agree to talk about one specific issue, like capping their nuclear enrichment levels, the West suddenly adds a brand new condition. They say, well, what about your ballistic missile ranges? What about your funding for regional proxy groups?
It makes a final deal impossible.
It creates a deliberately impossible diplomatic situation, which then politically justifies the eventual military action. And the sources strongly suggest Iranian intelligence knows exactly what is happening. They are publicly playing along with the talks to show the international community that they tried diplomacy, but internally, they are rapidly preparing for the hammer to drop.
So if that hammer finally does drop, what is the actual end game here? Let's move to our final area, Section 7, the scenarios and endgames. Because we always hear politicians talk about a limited surgical strike. You know, just send some bombers in, hit the nuclear centrifuge sites, and fly home, nice and clean.
Right, the limited strike fallacy. It's an incredibly dangerous myth propagated by people who don't understand the region. Serious strategic realists argue there is absolutely no such thing as a limited war with Iran.
Why not?
Because if you directly bomb their sovereign territory, Iran's leadership will immediately escalate the conflict into a full existential war mode. They have to. To ensure regime survival, they have to deliberately make the economic and military pain so great that the U.S. public demands a stop to the war.
And that inevitably leads us to the nuclear pivot.
This is perhaps the ultimate tragic irony of the whole scenario. The explicitly stated political goal of launching this war might be to forcibly stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
Right.
But defense analysts suggest that if the Iranian leadership suddenly faces a true existential threat, if they believe American troops are coming to overthrow the regime, they will immediately alter their religious and military nuclear doctrine. They already have the technical knowledge. They have the highly enriched fissile material.
Yeah.
A massive bombing campaign could actually force them to sprint to build a functional nuclear bomb right in the middle of the conflict as their absolute ultimate deterrent.
So the very war designed to stop the nuke actually forces the creation of the nuke.
It's a deadly paradox, and the political fallout from that failure would be immense. For the current U.S. administration, getting bogged down in a long, incredibly costly regional war with high American casualties, while gas prices hit $10 a gallon at home, that completely destroys a presidency. It heavily fuels extreme internal political fracturing within the United States.
And what happens in the Middle East region itself politically?
The fragile Arab monarchies could completely fall. We talked about the Arab Spring a decade ago. Imagine that level of unrest, but on absolute steroids. If the massive young populations of places like Jordan, Egypt, or Saudi Arabia see their unelected leaders actively helping the U.S. military destroy a neighboring Muslim nation, right while their own local economies are collapsing from the war,
Those regimes might not survive the year.
they might not. The geopolitical map of the Middle East could indeed be totally redrawn, but not at all in the neat, compliant way the Western strategic planners intend. It could easily result in a region completely dominated by radicalized revolutionary governments that are openly hostile to the West.
So let's try to summarize all of this deeply concerning analysis. We currently have a massive, highly advanced U.S. military hammer, this huge armada sitting in the Gulf, and it's looking for a nail to strike. But this particular nail is highly explosive. It is hardwired directly into the world's economic fuse, and it is quietly backed by major global nuclear powers like Russia and China.
That is the exact situation on the board right now. We are collectively standing on the very edge of a deep knife, loudly arguing about who has the right of way, all while the ground is actively crumbling underneath our feet.
It really makes you wonder, as a listener, if the stated goal of all this military buildup is regional security and global stability, because that is what all the official press releases claim, but the actual mechanism is a brutal war that could completely collapse the global economy and rapidly accelerate the very nuclear proliferation it claims it wants to stop.
Right.
Then you have to ask yourself, who is actually driving this bus, and what is the real hidden destination?
That is the ultimate question everyone needs to be asking right now, because once the first missiles are fired and the shooting actually starts, that bus has no brakes.
It's definitely something to think about deeply. So as you go about your week, don't just watch the flashy breaking news banners on TV. Watch the dry logistics. Watch the maritime insurance markets. Watch where the oil tankers are actually sailing, because that is where the real story is being told. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Stay informed out there.